Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Here we are in yet another location, a new studio. We've got like a new studio every day, I feel like, these days, or every episode. This studio is brought to you by my sister-in-law, Katie's sister, Kelsey. This is, I tell you what, she's got this place dialed. It is a nice spot to hang out in. So thank you, Auntie Kelsey, for providing us with this amazing studio space. Today, Katie and I are going to be talking about building margin into your life. What types of margin should we be pursuing as Christians, as parents, as husbands, and as fathers? And then maybe a better question, or actually I don't know if it's a better question, but it might be of more interest to some people, and that is, how have we failed to build margin into our life? Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it. When you're able to take the time to leave a rating or a review, whether that's on iTunes or Spotify or any other platform you might listen to podcasts on. Those are the two platforms I listen on, and so those are the only ones I really know about leaving a review on. If you watch us on YouTube, we would love it if you're able to subscribe to this channel or hit the like button or leave a comment below. I think those are all the things. And so with that said, we'll get this podcast rocking and rolling.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Okay, so before we get into this episode, I wanted to let you guys know that I do a live Q&A in the Get It All Done Clubhouse once a month. And this month, I had a surprise guest, and it was my mom. And she got on with me and did a Q&A. So you're considering doing a podcast. It seemed like too much setup. We don't have any margin in our life. So she just jumped on a live with me and did a Q&A in the Get It All Done Clubhouse. So if you're a member of the Get It All Done Club, that is up. You can go find that. I know that you will want to know about it. And if you aren't a member of the Clubhouse, you can find a lot of Q&As in there of my mother if you choose to join us this year. So anyways, wanted to let you guys know about that.
So you leave the lives up because you go live every month in the Clubhouse, but then I didn't realize you kept them up. You keep the recordings up?
Yeah, they're always recorded, and then they're saved in a little section if people want to go back and hear them.
Nice. It's like a little gold mine.
Yeah, a big gold mine.
A big gold mine. Yeah.
At this point, I feel like there's a lot of them in there.
Right.
So anyways, and that's something I'm looking forward to continuing this year in 2025. I love those. Okay, so this concept of margin, Elisha and I were throwing around topics for this podcast. And Elisha had a lot of good ideas. And I didn't feel like I could speak to any of them because of a little bit of a lack of margin in our life, which we know we've been running without margin for a while. But it was like too much brain power to think through some of these topics. And so we ended up deciding to talk about margin because I'm actually reading a book on this right now, where we've been discussing it. It's a phenomenal book. I'll link it down below if you feel like your life is you're just up to your tips.
Right.
And we started 2024 really last April, right, is when we decided that we were going to live a life of less margin in order to expedite things in our life. And it was an intentional decision. And it was one that we've learned a lot from.
Yeah, we went into this last season with our eyes open. I do not feel like anything necessarily caught us off guard. Like you said, in April, we had a meeting of the minds. We sat down. We thought, okay, do we want to sell the house? Do we want to start building? Do we want to move out into the property and live off grid for 6 months? Do we want to buy a dog? Are we open, to the Lord blessing us with a child with pregnancy? Are we going to keep building into our businesses the way we've been building them? We put all these things on the table, and we were like, yes to all those things. Let's go for it. Basically, we didn't want to say no to any of the things we were excited about. And we knew really starting end of March, beginning of April, that it was going to be the biggest year of commitments that we had undertaken in our marriage. And it's funny because in hindsight, we weren't wrong in that had everything gone according to plan, I think we would have executed. I think things would have gone really well. But that's a silly thing to say because we know that's not how life works. Life doesn't always go according to plan. There are unforeseen Like this year, 2025 is going to have so many unpredictable events in it. And I mean, already here we are, just think of the unpredictable things that have occurred already. Some, very dramatic things that have altered our life. And you realize, man, you want to build in margin into your life, because even though a lot of the things that we committed to, or not a lot of them, I'd say all the things we committed to, we're grateful. It came at the expense of other things that we really do care about. I think local friendships, our health, just carefree timelessness with our marriage, even though I think our marriage has been better than ever. We've been very united throughout this season. And I think a large part of that is because we were very clear on what we were doing together. Like there was no ifs, or we weren't, one of us wasn't on the fence when we committed to all these things. And so we're able to point back to that and stay united in our marriage. And so, I say that all to say that's the season that we are, Lord willing, wrapping up. And I say Lord willing because we've been in over our head with some things for some time now, but there's this reality of we're committed, whether it's financially, our word, right, or relationally, and we're thinking we can't back out now. And so how do you start saying no now? And it's funny, you're reading a book on margin. I'm reading, once again, The One Thing by Gary Keller, right? And he who chaseth two rabbits catcheth neither, is kind of the premise of this book. And it's such good timing for this book, for our family and for us as individuals.
Yeah, so the 4 types of margin that you want to look for in your life, or you want to build into your life, are, according to this book, and I resonated with it, our first, emotional margin. This is the most important type of margin, and I think it's honestly how we've been able to sustain this year. Is I feel like Elisha and I overall have been able to maintain emotional margin together, and with our kids and with friends and things like that. So that's the most important margin, is having support outside of yourself mentally. And there's a lot of things you can do to support emotional margin. I mean, there have been times where it's dipped. And obviously we're postpartum right now. We're 4 weeks postpartum as a couple. I say we because I think it's a family affair. And so there is less emotional margin there naturally. So
what are some examples of emotional margin versus like physical margin?
Okay, so emotional margin, I mean, it's if you have anxiety, depression, or weepy, like those would be signs of a lack of emotional margin. But what's funny is like something that you can do to improve your emotional margin is like have a good cry, that can make you feel good at the end of it and feel like you have more margin.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow. I didn't know.
For me, for sure.
I'm glad you're reading this book because now I don't have to. No, I'm joking. But this is I wouldn't have thought of saying that.
Really? So it's basically mental capacity, mental margin, the ability to handle things mentally. And then physical margin is something like your health. So if you are super, super fatigued and you aren't sleeping all the time or something like that, you don't have a lot of physical margin. Or if you are carrying a lot of extra weight, then you don't have a lot of physical margin if you are required for maybe a physical task, if you're weak or if you're heavy or something like that. If it's hard to breathe, if your cardiovascular health is poor. So those are a couple areas of margin. Another one is time. So is everything so scheduled in your life that if one thing goes wrong, it's a 5-car pileup? And then the last one is financial margin. So are you in debt? Are you just way overcommitted? Things like that.
Yeah.
So I would say this year we said yes to losing all the margins or going. And I think this is what I'm saying is we knew we were going to do that, but we thought it was for a short season. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have any margin in our timeline. That's probably one of the biggest issues is we were like, if everything goes according to plan, we will be without margin for 3 to 4 months. We can do that. And then we're going to get back to, for instance, having people over for dinner. We'll get back to giving in a way financially that we would like to. We'll get back to, or saving in a way that we would like to. We'll get back to all these things. We're just going to go all out for about 4 months. And if that timeline doesn't work out, then we're going to be entering into a state of being of survival, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about this, being from the perspective of being a Christian, because where does it say that? Where does the Bible say don't say that tomorrow I'm going to go to such and such a city and do business, but say, if the Lord wills, I'll do this. And there's the proverb, man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. And so as Christians, there is a but hopefully we get comfortable with an open-handedness to all of our plans, knowing that, yeah, of course, there are things that the Lord's impressed upon our heart, and then I'm sure in our own imagination, we've come up with some things that we want to make plans for. And then you also know that the Lord directs our steps. He alters our ways. He has every single one of our hairs numbered, and he knows our days. He knows when he's going to call us home. And that's unknown to us, right? We're working with a very limited amount of known factors when it comes to making plans. There are so many variables that are outside of our control. However, there are many variables that I think are within our control. That the Lord has seen fit within his sovereignty to bless us with decision making, and when we get to go to sleep, what we choose to read and watch before we go to bed, what language we get to use in our home. And when you fixate on those things and the plans that you have for those, I do think it can build that emotional margin that you talked about, and then from it, can trickle down into physical margin, and then that time margin. I mean, all these, it seems like, and I'm sure you have more insight because you've been reading this book. It seems like all of these could have a lot of overlap or a lot of influence on each other, right? Where when you're physically depleted or you don't have margin physically, emotionally, it's your emotions are going to take a hit from that. And if you don't have the time margin, you're physically going to take the hit because you don't have the time for rest and to recuperate. And then obviously, if you don't have the financial margin, you need to be putting in extra time into building back that financial margin. And so it is, I think the lines are probably very blurred. You can't just have this clean categorization and say, okay, for the next quarter, we're just going to focus on getting emotional margin.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's bad to focus on one at a time, because I think it's very overwhelming to focus on all of them. And I mean, as much as you don't like clear lines and boxes, it's just don't give me a clear box. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of overlap, but I do think there's seasons of time where it's been very helpful for us to drop 3 of them, say, and be like, hey, we are going to burn the candle at both ends, and we're going to increase our financial margin. And we've done that.
Yes.
And then, okay, that was not sustainable, but it was a sprint. Now that we have some financial margin here, we're going to focus on other margins. So I do think that there's seasons to kind of hone in on one. To be really specific with you guys, because I know we've just kind of talked in theory here. Basically, when we moved into the tent, and when people ask us about the tent, we look back on that season. And for those listeners who are new or aren't familiar with this, we were living in a canvas tent for much of or for half of 2024. And it was a very sweet season for our family, but it was what I would say a very selfish season looking back, because we were doing it for our goals to move forward faster. We wanted the bill to move forward faster. We wanted the finances to move forward faster. We wanted the unique experience for our family. And we didn't have, it put us in a place where we didn't have margin. It was very hard to have people over. It was hard to be committed locally to the community because things were just harder, getting dressed and washing clothes, and all those things were more difficult. And so it put us in a place of, we did have people over. Obviously, we did host, but it wasn't to the extent that we wanted to. And then that season really got prolonged. And so basically, we were in a season where we weren't really giving a lot out. It was using all of our resources just to live in that situation.
Yes.
And it was a very enjoyable season for our family. And I don't regret it from that instance, but I didn't realize how I don't want to live from that place of no margin for others and have our family sucking it all up.
Yeah, and it's hard to, I'm not saying we can't learn from that, and I don't disagree with your analysis of last year, because it was a win for our family, but we weren't able to give much beyond our own life. And so it was so much fun when there was nothing else that we were focusing on other than just existing And it was like the highlight of our life when we could spend multiple days just dialing in camp and our routine and meals and, the creek, whatever. The whole thing was just, I don't know, it was so picturesque, so picture perfect. And I do wonder if there's almost the necessity for seasons like that in order to move forward in certain areas. Again, things that we were not willing to compromise on were our marriage, were our children, parenting. And I think those are actually great seasons for both of those things. And then you clearly see where the hierarchy lies when you start running out of margin. We're kind of like, well, that's going to go. And I think every family, every couple you have to have a hierarchy. You can't do all things equally, with the same amount of intentionality all the time. And so I agree with you. I want to be in a place where we can give, where there's, again, using that word margin, or there's just an abundance maybe, where we're able to overflow into blessing other people's lives. But I don't think big picture that 6-month period is actually going to be a hindrance on our ability to serve, Lord willing, our local community or our friends and our family. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Even though for that snapshot of time.
I agree with you.
Because it's the same thing if you were to look at, right now we're in a postpartum season. It's like we're doing this so obviously for physical reasons, for the lack of sleep, a new baby. And everybody, I think, wraps their mind around that. Nobody's saying, oh, you don't value, hopefully nobody's saying this. You don't value community. You don't value hospitality. You don't value community service. They see it as a season, and we see this as a season. And I do think that was a season where maybe those other things were put on hold, or they were not, performed at the same level as as years prior. But I do think it can actually serve those other things, big picture, when it comes to having a property that we can host on, and in being in a place financially, like you said, where we do have that abundance. And so I don't know. I don't want to get too fixated on one season, and say this was a mistake. I think just learn from it and be like, that season's going to serve us going forward, but hopefully we don't enter into another season like that.
Yeah. And I don't think that the tent was a mistake. I do think that it really made clear, okay, I don't want to craft a lifestyle around no margin, because it's very tempting for me to say yes, yes, yes until there's no margin, and then stop saying yes because I don't have any margin. I can't commit to anything else. Instead of being like, no, we need to stop before the entire page is filled, and realize that is where you're going to get the most enjoyment and fulfillment and progress and all those things. Within what you're doing is when there's margin. Because last summer we went through a season where we didn't really feel like we had margin because we were just going from one fantastic event to the next fantastic event, and there was no breathing room in between. And when you have no breathing room, then you don't actually appreciate the things like you could or should, because these were great things and we could have enjoyed one of them a month, but as it was, it kind of became this giant to-do list and we were just getting through one to try to get through the other. And I don't want to create a life, and again, I'm just going into big picture, where, because I think it's really easy here in America to create an entire life where you just go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And there were things that we knew moving out to the tent, which is why we were like, okay, this is going to be a short season. We're going to have the build all wrapped up. And then, because we knew we were going to have less margin emotionally, physically, time-wise, specifically when the baby arrived.
Right.
And so we're like, we need it, even though we didn't have words for it, we're like, we really need to get through this season because margin's going to be taken away when the baby comes. And we were still in the same season. So when you had no margin to start with, and then you lose margin, that's when you start maybe burning out.
Right.
And I've been so grateful for this season, for God's faithfulness through it, through friends and family, for Elisha. And I don't feel like we're burnt out, but I do feel like it is a season where you're just hoping nothing goes wrong.
Right.
Because you might sink. You know, and it's like, that's not how we've always lived our life, and that's not how we're going to continue living our life. But you feel like stuff's just kind of hanging in the balance right now. And again, I think we're a month out from getting a lot more margin. But you just have to have margin in timelines. That's one of my biggest takeaways from this last year. Time is a really big margin. point for us.
Yeah. Well, what's your new saying?
Yeah. Everything is a marathon. Plan accordingly. There are no sprints in life. I used to think that there were, but sprints turn into marathons, and then you're just sprinting for 26 miles.
Yeah, because I think even when you take
Fly
that
off the treadmill.
Yeah, when you take that analogy into how we were viewing this last year, we really thought because we knew we were pregnant, there was a baby coming, we were going to have a postpartum season. We were like, let's sprint. And we thought that sprinting would create margin.
Yeah.
We're like, let's get a nice big lead on whatever, the rest of the pack or whatever, like really expedite our pace here. But the fact is that if you sprint for any portion of the race, you're going to have to pay for it at some point. Like you still have to finish the 26 miles. And we didn't have that mindset at all. We didn't think like, okay, going into postpartum, we're going to need rest and margin and be in a place of abundance. Again, tons of lessons learned, and it's hard. Again, we're not. I don't know about you, but I don't think we're at a place of regret.
No, I'm not.
I think we look back and we stand by pretty much all the decisions we made and what we committed to, and with where we're at even now, we're like, this is kind of awesome. I mean, we're currently kind of vagabonds, right? Living at your folks' place. Like my parents are like, hey, you can come live with us. And we're kind of trying to buy time. We
have like 3 weeks that we're bumping around.
Right. And it's honestly kind of fun. It's a blast. Like the kids love it. It's exciting.
Yeah. It's like never a season I would have planned for myself. But it is a season where it's been really special. And again, it's not long in the big scheme of things. But I wouldn't have chosen to like have a newborn and be bumping around.
Yeah. Yeah. I like breaking principles down to actions as much as I can. And so when I think of the principles of emotional, physical time and financial margin, for instance, like the physical and the mental or the emotional, I want to pick that with like a consistent event. And, we were just, once again, being able to talk with Sally Clarkson was so invigorating because you realize how like anybody that has exceptional results in any area of life has said no to like 99.9% of life. Like they've said no to way more than what you're saying no to probably. And that's why they have an exceptional family culture, marriage, or, where they're at financially or business impact, so on and so forth. And when I think of, at least my takeaway from that conversation with Sally was like, we need to protect, and this is getting crazy practical, like we need to protect family dinner time. Like we just need to defend that with so much vigilance. And we had gotten we started kind of making compromises where we're like, well, ideally 5 dinners a night at home, that would probably be our ideal because we love it, 5 evenings. And then it's, 4 because we've got this commitment and we like that. And then all of a sudden it's 3. And like, that's like what we're planning on. Is 3.
3 is best case scenario.
Best case scenario. If something unexpected doesn't pop up, somebody comes through town or you get a last minute invite to something you really want to do. And so we're living in this place of no margin when it comes to, even actually,
You're right.
when it comes to family dinners.
You're right.
We're like 3. And actually I'd say that's below, you're living in the red, I would say. And looking at it now, I think you're planning to be in the red. And you're like, okay, so if we're living in the red, we're best case scenario, we're not getting what I would consider to be a healthy amount of family evenings together. Then something unexpected pops up, and all of a sudden you're getting 2 evenings together or 1 evening together. You're like, well, that's a huge mistake. And so
you're right. If you plan for no margin, then you are living in the red because there's always unexpected things.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that even when if there was unexpected things, I still think 3 is not enough.
I don't either, but I'm saying, okay, say we have 4 and that's like our hard line, like we really want 4 nights. We will be in the negative space.
Yes, I agree. I
don't even know, like, what do you even call it when there's no margin? Like
zero margin.
Like what is the space when you're off the page? I think of that with like every area of life, like the kids' schooling. Like we've really just been like, okay, we need to hone in on a couple things that we want to do well with the children. That was something that really stood out with Sally too. You have to say no to all the other things or you become you never get good at any of them.
Right.
You never get progress in any of them, and yet you're running around trying to keep up with the Joneses in every single extracurricular.
Yeah, and there's an element of protecting ourselves, I think, or preemptively preserving ourselves from overextending, because you and I are both very excitable people. And I mean, going to our Colby, index, you're a high quick start, and I'm not as high as you, but I'm not low. I'm not a low quick start. I'm a high quick start. And so whatever we're doing, we think is the coolest thing that there is in the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's like wherever we're at, we're like, this place is that, like, everyone needs to be here. This is the coolest spot. Or whatever activity we're doing, we're like, we need to devote our life to this. And there's a danger in that. It's a really fun way to live life.
Yeah.
Because we're stoked. Like, we finish a book and we think it's the best book ever, and we're telling each other about it. And we've got the track record to show it. That also leads to a lot of bouncing around, like not sticking with some things. I think that we've over time learned to stick with things, but that wasn't our natural bent. Our natural bent was like, everything's so exciting, let's do a little bit of everything. And then you end up not doing anything well. And so, what was I going to say with that? Okay, real quick. If you're looking for music lessons for your family, piano lessons, guitar lessons, fiddle lessons, ukulele lessons, mandolin lessons, you can subscribe to Voteberg Music Academy and get lessons for the whole family. Subscribe to the piano course, one subscription, get you piano lessons for the whole family. Subscribe to guitar, that gets you guitar lessons for the whole family. We'll link it below. You get a special discount, and you can see that below by listening to our podcast. That's how you get the discount. Go check it out.
Yeah, I mean, I no longer even consider, I think that quitting things when you start a lot of things is a way to give yourself margin. Mm-hmm. And for a few years, we have known that we don't want to be quitters. And so we've just said yes to everything and then tried to pile through it.
Yep.
And I think I'm at a place right now where I don't know if it's the right time to just straight up quit some stuff. Mm-hmm. And it scares me to do that because I feel like you lose credibility, which for good reason. You're quitting on something you committed to, and I do think commitments are really important. But we've gotten so out of control that I'm not sure that we can live through the rest of our commitments in a healthy way for the kids. Right.
I keep telling myself, okay, we just got to get through this commitment, get through this commitment. And I'm with you. Just even in having this conversation, things are popping into my brain where it's like, you know what, that might just be, whether it's letting someone down or, and
it does. And in every instance, it requires letting someone down.
Yeah.
Which is what makes it really hard. And again, you don't want that to be your reputation.
Yes.
And so, I mean, there are things like, I really respect Elisha for keeping the podcast going for a bunch of years. Or, our businesses or things like that. And I don't feel like we've quit on the big things. But there have been lots of little decisions along the way that, I'm not sure if it's worth committing to at all costs. You're kind of thinking, okay, what does this tell our kids? Like, I want them to commit to things and follow through and all that. But then you're like, well, also, I don't want this to destroy their childhood. Our kids have been great, but.
Yeah, that's a good point because growing up, we played sports and we'd get partway through a season or you'd have an issue, I'd have a bad game and I'd want to quit playing basketball. It's like, no, you need to see this through, see the season through. We can reevaluate after next season. And it's funny because over time, my parents kind of stopped that mindset with some things. It had to be a good reason. You obviously, when it comes to parenting, when your children are just being lazy or they are having they need to grow through it because of character. But then there came a point where my parents, with some of my younger brothers, they get partway through a season and they're hearing about things that are going on, culturally, whether it's in the locker room or on the bus or what the coaches are saying or what teammates are saying. And they're kind of like, well, yeah, we're going to quit. Like, that's just an obvious, we're going to quit if that's what's going on. And so there is a threshold, I think, that parents need to know. They need to know what that is, and they need to use their judgment to be like, okay, it's time to pull the plug on this. And did they let people down? Absolutely. Like, were people disappointed? Absolutely. For the short term, I think when you have a long-term perspective on things, you can really maintain long-term healthy relationships with people in your community or whoever's being affected by the decision. But I do think sometimes it does require that hard decision in the moment for your children or for yourself. Say, no, we're not going to. I know we committed to this 12-week thing, or I know we committed to this for a year, and we're just not going to be able to see it through. And so, I don't know what that is, for us right now. But I do think it's probably a reality of life that whether or not it's going to have to happen right now, I do think even high achieving people, they get better at saying no. They get better at not committing to things.
Yeah, they get better at quitting before they start.
Yeah.
Like that book, The Dip. We just read that book, The Dip. Great book. And it's really a short read, but it's saying successful people get better at quitting before they get in the dip. Mm-hmm. So basically, you're always excited at the beginning of something, and then you're always going to go into a dip before you see success. And sometimes you don't really want to quit in the dip. The more successful you are, the more things you quit before you start.
Yes.
And say no, essentially, so that you don't have to quit in the dip. But successful people quit, I put that in air quotes, a lot of things. Like Elisha was saying, they say no to a lot of things. And I feel like in order to turn our ship around, we might need to quit some things in the dip, which is unfortunate. But we're looking at the payout on the other side going, I don't actually think this is best for a family, even in the long run. Right. Even if we survive the dip. Yep. I don't think it's in the end the results that we want. Yeah, I agree. And, we bumped into somebody and it came up in conversation where they had stopped something and there was hurt feelings and people weren't talking to them for a season of time, but that season ended and it's like they're on better terms than ever. Yeah, they kept proving that they were there for them. They were going to support them. And it's like they quit this one event, right? Reoccurring event. And it wasn't, you'd think there goes their reputation. Those people are upset at them. They're turning, they're getting the cold shoulder. And it was very temporary. And I'm not saying that's always the case. Maybe there will be long-standing disappointment that you won't ever be able to recover from, as in disappointing other people. But when you have the long-term perspective and you realize it's not you're not doing it because you don't like people, right? You're not doing it because you're doing it because you realize you need to pour into your marriage, your family, and you have, that's the reality of life. Like my children and my wife are more important to me than anyone else. And so decisions are going to need to be made accordingly. And I think that as this happens over time, I think you can do those things where you quit those things. You quit things you need to quit because there's red flags, but then you don't keep committing. Yes. And so I think that's what develops a reputation of a quitter is when you keep committing, because then you keep finding yourselves in these positions. And I feel like it's been a long time since we have found ourselves in these positions. Maybe like our first year of marriage or something like that. Then I feel like we really locked onto a few things. We're like, we are going to see these through till death do us part. Yeah. And I would say we're all still committed to those things and we aren't willing to sacrifice them right now. But it's kind of like decluttering. It's kind of funny when I follow these minimalist channels and they are decluttering. If they start decluttering other people's houses, totally it makes sense. When they keep decluttering their own house, I'm going, okay, you aren't really a minimalist. You just, because you buy tons of stuff. The fact that you have to keep decluttering means that you just have a buying problem. I've thought of that in my own life. It's like I should be able to declutter maybe once a year. Once I'm decluttered, I think it takes a lot to get there. But then once you're decluttered, I feel like maybe 6 months, maybe once a year. And then you should be good for a really long time because you aren't purchasing and bringing more and more and more items into your home. So I feel like that with this commitment thing. If you become a quitter when you continue overcommitting, the root is the overcommitment. Wow. Because not the quitting necessarily. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's how debt is accrued financially is like, you can pay it off, pay it down, or cut spending in your life, but then you keep overspending. Yeah, exactly. It's like you want to be able to eliminate debt right now and then also change your behavior so that you're not accruing additional debt in the future. Like you want your lifestyle to be below your income level. And when it comes to income. Yes. And it's the same, I think, with every other area is it's like, don't just worry about paying this off now, even though that might need to happen. Like you might need to sell the car, you might need to sell any extra things you have to pay this thing down. But then don't just get right back to where you were. Like,
through
what's
the same decisions.
The root is true. The root is wanting more than what you can afford, right? Or overspending. I think of that with even the emotional and physical margin. When I had lost half my hair when I was 19, I had bald spots all over my head. It was just falling out like crazy. I was taking a ton of supplements. I was going to a lot of different doctors. But when I talk to people now and I say, okay, Neolife's what helped me grow my hair back, I have to let them know that the root cause was stress and not managing emotional stress. And so if someone has an issue that's based in the root cause is stress, then it doesn't matter how much you're trying to give yourself margin with nutrition, even though that is going to be what helps get you out of the hole. You have to address the root, which is unhealthy management of something physical that's affecting your long-term health. And so when you just have to look, I guess, at the root cause of what is causing the negative trait, because what you're going to do to solve it is not necessarily what you're going to do to manage it long term.
Yep.
So like managing my health long term requires managing my stress. Managing our finances long term requires not overspending. Managing our children's well-being requires not overcommitting.
Yes.
So boiling it down to those things can really help sustain a life of margin. And I'm just talking this out right now because I'm trying to process what's going to help us sustain this.
Yep.
Once you get back to ground zero and feel like you're in a good place.
Yeah, because the fact is that the opportunities are only going to increase. Just like unless you are vigilant in changing your spending behavior, the opportunity to spend too much money, that's only going to increase as years go on. There's always more stuff and more things and nicer things to be able to upgrade to. And so it's the same, I think, with commitments to people, to opportunities, to events, is that those are only going to increase. And so we can't rely on those things being a solution to our overcommitting. We need to be the ones that take stewardship of our time and train ourselves to say no and to have a filter through which we can process these opportunities or ideas. Because maybe it's not even an opportunity, it's just an idea that you spend way too much time pursuing, and you're trying to make it an opportunity. There's so much. I don't know why it's just been standing out to me so vividly when I think of every high achiever, whether that's, in parenting. I think of my dad right now, who in my mind is just a totally high achiever when it comes to marriage and parenting. And he, for the longest time, would say, when people say, Joe, what are you up to these days? He'd bump into people, say, just raising kids, just trying to love my wife and raise my kids. And it was this kind of like, shucks kind of response, but it was actually the truth. Like that's what he fixated on for 20 years. And it's not like, he now neglects it, but that was the priority. And because that was the priority, obviously he provided and he took care of his health and he took care of, like he did these other things. He went to church, but those were he was fixated on those things for an extended period of time. And it's the same thing when you look at, whoever's autobiography or biography that you've read, they've achieved a high level. They were fixated on that thing and almost to an obsessive level for a very extended period of time. And the reason that stands out to me is because I'm seeing how they said no to. They were like it's like this pursuit to be the most interesting person, to be this diverse person with a bunch of experiences. But you realize the most successful people and the people that we actually call interesting are in a lot of ways the least interesting from the perspective of they've done the least amount of things. They've done one or two things very well. And I don't know why that's just standing out to me so much these last few weeks, where it's like, okay, what I just really need to get, I need to let go of so many other things, other ideals or pursuits or dreams or aspirations for the sake of pursuing excellence in the things I really think matter the most to me. Marriage, family,
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking as you were saying this of what we've been reading recently, because obviously it's the one thing, the dip, margin. And then another book that we've been reading is 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. as you can see where our brains have been, give us solutions because we aren't giving them to ourselves. And a tool in there that we've been using in our own life and experimenting with very recently is 25 things. And it's this concept that I'm going to totally butcher it, but essentially Warren Buffett supposedly said that you're supposed to write down 25 of your priorities, things that you're committed to that are important to you, and circle the top 5 and plan your life around those things. And then the other 20 things, avoid at all costs. And you kind of are like, what? I did not see that coming.
Yeah, I know.
These are 20 things I care about. But those things are the most likely to derail you actually prioritizing the top 5 things that you truly care about, that you want to see moved forward. And so this year, if we'd had that tool at the beginning of the year, we would have realized that even at a very basic level, we were circling like 10 priorities.
Yep.
I mean, like, these are the 10 things we're going to move forward this year. It was too many things. And a lot of them should have been down in that category of avoid at all costs during this season.
Well, I would actually say that we were pretty close to only committing to 5, maybe 6 or 7 things. I don't think it was 10. The problem is that we didn't avoid the other things at all cost.
Oh, that's good.
And so I think we committed to, maybe we probably overcommitted in the sense that it was 6 or 7.
Build business. Yeah.
And you're like, okay, we committed to these things, but then the problem is that we weren't vigilant in completely avoiding the other things that we knew were kind of interesting to us.
You're so right. So we did these one-off things that were cool, that were fun experiences, that took a ton of energy. And again, took a lot of the margin. We were saving the margin, and then we put those things in the margin. Then there's no margin.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's another thing that I'm really looking forward to doing in more categories even. Like with raising our kids, I tend to have shiny object syndrome with raising our kids, especially at our children's ages right now. Kind of the sky's the limit, because really anything you choose to invest in with a 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, they can get good at pretty much anything. And so it's very appealing to, we've talked about this. We went to a play and all of a sudden I'm like, our kids should be in theater. Or, we see some other children that are great at ball sports and are like, we really should enroll them in these school sports. Or, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And it was really freeing in our interview with Sally Clarkson. I think because we share so many of the same value systems, I'm like, wow, I love that her children were artists and were wordsmiths and enjoyed discussions. Like, these are all things I really value, and Elisha and I really value in our home. And yet, I have on my list of 25 things for our children, like being a stem cell researcher or whatever.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like, just stuff that's so random and out there and is like not in Elisha's and my wheelhouse. So we definitely have to bring in someone else to, add that skill set.
Yep.
And I'm not saying like exposing our kids to a variety of things isn't a great idea. We would like to do that as one-offs. But in terms of like weekly pursuing these activities, signing them up for ongoing classes, stuff like that, we need to boil it down to 5 things and avoid the other 20 opportunities at all costs.
I agree.
With our children's development, if we want them to really develop deep roots in certain areas.
Yep. And you can, I think, a way that you can make this decision is like, what would we enjoy talking about? Like, what would we sit around and be generally interested in? Because that's the culture you're going to be building. And is it a culture that you get to be a part of with your kids when it comes to discussion? And I like looking back at our parents, our grandparents, and then looking at where we fall in line and being like, okay, what would be the next rational or what would be the next like predictable step? If you're just reading this story, like what were our grandparents good at? What did they pursue? Our parents, what did they pursue? Now they had us. What would be the next pursuit or the most reasonable pursuit?
Like, how can our children stand on our shoulders?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I think something that really stood out because we were just at my uncle's memorial. It was his second memorial. He had one on the East Coast. He had one here on the West Coast. Over 1,000 people came. And it just stood out to me because my grandma's funeral was last year. And over 1,000 people came to her funeral. And it just really stood out to me wow, we are so blessed with so many people in our lives. And I think that sometimes we're a part of a legacy where people have really mattered to my grandparents, to my parents, to my uncles and aunts. They've touched a lot of lives. And as a result, we're just grandfathered into people who know us and know our names and care about us. And sometimes I've resented the fact that we have so many people in our lives. And I know that sounds so dumb because it's a huge blessing, but sometimes it's been overwhelming. And I've considered friends who don't have that many family members or don't have that many extended family members or friendships. And I go, wow, that just looks so much more manageable. And they just don't have these demands on their time or these opportunities, or, they aren't going to 6 weddings in 3 months. And then it really dawned on me, though, at this memorial, wow, what a gift. This is a legacy on Elisha's side of the family and on my side of the family. And it's something that we're going to devote time to. We're going to devote time to a lot of relationships, a lot of memorials, a lot of weddings. We want to be at these things. We want to be people who are a part of these people. And so anyways, it made it, I guess, seem like this is a calling that the Lord's just given us, that we've been grandfathered into. And I don't want to resent that. That needs to be one of our priorities.
Amen.
Is people.
That's right.
And we're going to spend more money on traveling to people's events.
That's right.
And more time. And so we need to leave margin for that, because that is something that we're called to.
Exactly. We need to budget that into the year. We need to, like, mentally or on the calendar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Instead of being like, why are there all these events, or why are there all these things? Instead, it's like, oh no, this is something where we get to stand on our parents' shoulders in this area where other people don't have that specific thing. I think of it with, like, okay, engineering. If you're of an engineering mind, then it's going to make a lot of sense for your kids to pursue engineering.
That's right.
We want to expose our kids to engineering, mechanics, the sciences, things like that. They might take off and stand on our shoulders and go that route on their own, but it's not going to be something we aggressively pursue, because that's not something that we already have momentum in.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
That's it.
All right. Lyman's waking up. He's squirreling.
He is.
Yes.
He's ready to eat. He's just been a little dull baby. And I'll tell you what, that has been the biggest gift of this season, is just how sweet and easygoing he's been.
Yes.
And the Lord has just been so gracious with him being such a easygoing baby, and also just being our 6th. I think there's just not the stress there, or the emotional stress of, oh, is it always going to be like this? Or I'm so exhausted, he's never going to sleep through the night, or whatever.
Right.
We just have that history of knowing what to expect, and the processes of getting a newborn to the infant stage, where everyone's getting a little more sleep and everything's a little more predictable. And so I feel like that's been a big blessing for our emotional margin, even when the physical margin is very small.
You're right. That's good. That's good.
Maybe that's how you differentiate those two.
Nice.
Thank you guys for listening to us verbally process. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. We'll link those books down below.
Yeah, those are great. And we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.